He once had an incident on a coastal site which is very useful to analyze for all pilots because it shows some basic principles of coastal flying that will apply to all of your flying when you're close to the terrain. He starts off soaring this coastal area. There's a beach landing down at the bottom and a bit of a cliff, and there's some bridge lift on this cliff, so he's able to go up and down and explore and play a little bit. But then he decides to go and explore further up the coastline because he's never been that way and wants to do something interesting with his flight today. So he's looking at the coast ahead and thinking when he gets enough height, he can maybe transition and go and explore a little bit. So that's what he does when he gets one pass where he's suddenly a lot higher than before. This to me is a warning sign already. When you've been doing the same thing and you're suddenly getting higher, what's the explanation? Have you suddenly become a really awesome pilot, or has the wind speed increased? So that's what's happened to give you more altitude. You're in ridge lift. So you've got higher because the wind is increasing. So that's first warning sign. And then you're looking at this piece of cliff coastline that you're flying along in front here. You can see at this point his ground speed on the GPS is sitting at 0. What does this mean about the wind direction and wind speed that he's flying in right now? What will happen to the airflow in area B, that bubble? What will the wind strength be in area C? And what will happen in area D? So if you're struggling to answer the wind speed and direction question, have a look at the airspeed video, which will explain to you exactly how you can identify the wind direction and speed. But if he's flying at trim speed, let's say his hands are up, you can expect about 35 kilometers an hour airspeed on a paraglider at sea level, which means that there must be 35 kilometers an hour of wind blowing in the opposite direction to the way that he's trying to fly. That's why his ground speed's 0. So he's pointing into wind, and given that his track has been progressing along the coastline, we know the wind is between southwest and west-southwest. And because he's against the cliff area, it's probably diverting the wind slightly. So I would expect the wind is actually southwest, coming in off the sea and then being redirected slightly by the cliff line, which means he's fighting a headwind where he is, and the wind is running along that cliff area, which is going to create a lot of turbulence. You can see the wind accelerating around the corner where it's in the Venturi. Now, Venturi can usually increase the wind speed up to 60%. I've been a bit conservative here because he's already in some Venturi effect by being on the side of the cliff area. But it's going to be accelerated. So if you've got 45 kilometers an hour running over a spine like that, it's going to draw in and create this spinning rotor effect into the bowl, which is then going to get carried onto the plateau. And to the right of that, there's going to be a lip rotor formed by the cliff and the airflow coming up over the cliff and rolling on the lip. So that's going to throw turbulence into this entire area on the right hand side, which means that it's going to be very lumpy there. And there's also going to be a severe shear layer because the wind is very strong, 45 kilometers an hour running over the top of the surface. But there'll be a protected area down at the bottom. At ground level, there might even be some sort of backflow coming back towards that cliff area. So there's going to be a dramatic change in wind speed and direction at 20 meters up, something like that. So that whole area is compromised. It's going to be nasty there, and you're going to have to look elsewhere for your safe landing options. So would you choose to top land at X, land at E, land behind the surf line at F, or maybe at A on the rocky outcrop? Or is there another option? Pause the video and leave a comment to engage your critical thinking. So I think we've established with the rotor, we definitely don't want to be trying to land at X. That is going to be the focus point of that rotor. Sheer turbulence, roll from the cliff. It's going to be really ugly to land there. And you want to get your legs down now if you're thinking of landing on the top, so that if you have a collapse, you can parachute landing fall it rather than trying to land on the bottom of your harness, which is no good for your spine. Landing back at E is possible. You're going to expect to do a parachute landing fall. It's going to be pretty turbulent, but depending on how much clearance you can get, if you can glide back further back from the edge as far as possible, while still pointing into wind, you do have some options of top landing. Okay, it's going to be a bit random and I can't guarantee your safety. I would sometimes top land in this situation, especially if the ground slopes upwards from the cliff towards where I land, so that the airflow is smoothened and it isn't a downward slope for the airflow, which creates more of this shear problem and a harder turbulent rotor area. Okay, other landing options. You could, if you'd considered landing behind the surf line, because you're worried about the danger of the surf. Definitely landing in the breaking waves is a total no-no. But if you landed behind the surf line, I would still be concerned in that position that the onshore wind would just push you straight into the surf line. You'd have to land a long way back so that you've got time to unclip from your glider and swim clear. And you're pretty much committing your glider to being absolutely destroyed. I don't think you get it out of this situation. With an onshore wind, it's going to be the end of the glider. I would consider landing at A, being that the airflow is going to be very smooth there. Just a straight onshore wind coming in, and it would allow you to veer out away from the cliff, away from the rotor area, and just come in with some brake on, just a vertical descent, and you can exactly time and position yourself on this area. But I would only consider this if the rocks are not actually wet with breaking waves. If there's any surf, even a few millimeters of water movement, that will pull your glider into the breaking surf zone. So it's something I might consider if I was confident that I could drop the glider down against the base of the cliffs and away from any of the surf, because it's a very controlled landing. You're not in any turbulence. It's very, very slow. You'd probably have to use a bit of speed bar to get down there. I just mention it as an option so that you don't think you have to land in the rotor on the top. It is not ideal, and it does put you at risk of, if the tide is coming in, maybe that is a part of beach that is actually closed off and you can't get out from there. So it's super risky, but it's much better than landing in the sea. A better option than all of those is to just turn around and soar back along the coast. If you've got a headwind here, you'll have a fantastic glide downwind. You only need a few sections of the ridge to be creating a little bit of ridge lift to be able to link it back to the beach landing which you left earlier to get to these cliffs. And this is what I would have in mind all the time while I was trying to explore along the coast, is that I'm going to cut and run as soon as I get into this sort of air where you can see you are not going to clear the cliff line, you're sinking, and you just need to cut and run, turn left, bank away, glide downwind, and go for your beach landing options further downwind. And maybe if that had been in mind all the time, you would have immediately gone for it and not be tempted to topland, which was never going to be a safe option on this area of cliffs. The final option, thanks to Andy Raw, is to go across to the area B, which is going to be very lifty, and to use that to get maximum height, and then use that height to glide and escape from this area. Now, I would only consider that if I was 100% sure that I'm going to be able to glide transition to area B. And I think that might have been in your mind as you came along this coastline cliff area, but you haven't identified early enough that you're not going to make it. And for that sort of judgment, I'd recommend you watch the Where Will I Land video, where you can learn how to read your glide point visually on the terrain. And by doing that, you would immediately see that this cliff area B was rising in your field of vision against the background. So you weren't going to make it clear around the front of the cliff area, which means you would have had an early warning signal to bank and turn left and get out of there before it became a problem. Unfortunately, Jans decided to go in for a top landing just on the top of the cliff here, and we all know what happens at point X. So unfortunately, there was an injury. He is recovering, but that was a hard lesson to learn about where the rotor is, and you did have some warning signs given the lack of ground speed on this section coming up. As you approaching with very low ground speed, you must always bear in mind, if the ground speed is low, you're flying in a strong headwind. Any terrain will give you turbulence, so your goal should be to get away from the ground, to go around and fly downwind. And looking back on this cliff line, there are some positions here that you'd be able to get some lift on the way back. There's a little bowl here where you got lift before. That little piece there, I would expect that to be catching the wind. And that is your little soaring bridge to get back to. And then from there, you can soar back to the next little bridge. This is probably the only area that I would consider to be safe for top landing. If the wind isn't coming around the cliffs upwind of it, I think the wind would probably be with a southwesterly, would be coming in like that. And it gives you an opportunity to top land in a fairly smooth open top of the hill before it drops down the back. I wouldn't like to be in this further downward sloping terrain. And then first prize is getting yourself back to the beach area, which was below the original launch site, where you'd be able to swing in smooth airflow and land on the beach. And I think you had enough height to do that from one of the points where you were getting really low ground speed, like particularly here, you've got 5 kilometers an hour, you've got a little bit of lift. But that is your warning sign. If you are sitting here and you've parked and you've got 5 k's an hour forward speed, you point it into wind, and this kind of terrain upwind of you is dangerous. So just turn around at that point and fall back to the cliff that was so soarable and was a safer place to play and to land. But thanks for sending your flight in. It's been very useful and educational for pilots, and I hope you recover well and stay away from ground turbulence caused by extreme crosswinds on terrain in future. Thanks, Jans. I wish you safe flying. Welcome to a week of specialized video training in Soaring Flight. This course has over 6 hours of video training in soaring with your paraglider. And it's divided into about an hour a day so that you can go at a good pace and you can get through a comprehensive program by the end of the week. You'll discover where the lift is, how to avoid turbulence, how to flow through the traffic, and glide effectively. If you want to boost your airtime, this is the course for you. It's the 4th level in my comprehensive system of pilot progression. It comes after launch skills and prepares you for paraglider control. So why do you need this course? It's pretty easy to go soaring on your own and just float around when the wind's on and the conditions are good. But you might be in an environment where you don't often fly with traffic. And this is where I can really help you. I've got a lot of point of view videos where I take you through traffic situations and I talk you through how I'm moving to establish defensive flying practices. This will be really helpful for your whole flying career so that you build up an awareness of where the other pilots are and ways that you can direct the flows to improve the traffic for yourself. I'll also teach you the tricky art of finding thermals in the ridge lift and working your way through the traffic and getting out and up and away, which is the goal. You want to be able to soar really well so that you can maintain your altitude in those periods where the thermals aren't coming through. And then you're best placed to be able to hook that thermal and get away from the hill. So these skills will apply for a long time through your flying career. I also do a deep dive into turbulence and where you can find turbulence so that it doesn't surprise you when you're soaring close to the terrain. By the end of this course, you'll understand exactly where the turbulence is going to be created and how you can fly even in turbulent conditions to still keep yourself safe by your strategy and where you position yourself and what you're paying attention to. There's also a section on getting your best glide where we go into polar curves and you'll understand how to choose the right speed to fly given the conditions that you're in. There's also a task sheet that goes with the course where I've given you exercises to work on to further develop your skills. This will really help consolidate your theoretical knowledge and build your skills in a progressive way. There's an amazing week ahead for you and I'm excited to share my knowledge with you. Let's get soaring.